Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture in this benighted age, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes or by plugging our RSS feed into your favorite podcatcher. You can find the RSS feed on our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on Spotify, YouTube, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And visit patreon.com/VMSPod or paypal.me/VMSPod to make a one-time or recurring donation and help me continue to produce smart conversation about books, art, comics, and culture every week at the Virtual Memories Show. Well, let's just dive into this week's show. Our guest this time around is the writer Darryl Pinckney. Last week, New York Review Books sent me a copy of the new edition of Darryl's book, Blackballed, The Black Vote and U.S. Democracy, which comes out today. And I was so taken by it that I hit up their publicist a few hours later to see if Darryl would be available that weekend for a podcast. He was, and here we are. Now, Blackballed reissues a pair of Darryl's essays from the Obama era, along with a new one from this summer, Buck Moon in Harlem. All three are elegant, insightful, cutting pieces of writing that explore black enfranchisement and voter suppression, the history of the civil rights movement, and the differing approaches of its key figures, to put it mildly, the role of mass protests, this summer's explosion of BLM protests against police violence, and the complexity of Barack Obama and black identity in ways that I just never considered, being on the outside of all this. And there's a lot more, including some of Darryl's life story and how it plays into some of these movements. And all of this is in like 120 or so pages. It's a super compelling read, as I think I implied at the very beginning. So once I finished reading Blackballed, like by the next morning, I noticed that Darryl's essay collection that came out last year, Busted in New York and Other Essays, is going to be coming out in paperback in about a month. So compulsively, I ordered that from Watchung Booksellers down in Montclair, New Jersey. Drove down and picked it up on Friday, read most of it by the time Darryl and I recorded on Sunday. And in an absolute rarity, I actually kept going with the book after our podcast and finished it Monday evening. And I say rarity because I always have so many more books ahead of me for upcoming shows that I can't afford to spend time reading one for a past guest. But Busted in New York is that good. So in this one case, I'd say I decided to make an exception. The book forced itself on me, is a better way to put it. Busted in New York's essays cover a lot of territory around black culture, politics, Darryl's personal history, and honestly, both Blackballed and Busted make me awfully glad that this podcast just takes me outside of my little cocoon, you know? Also, this episode got me to restart my subscription to the New York Review of Books, so I can read more of Darryl's stuff. And I know I'm going to regret that as the paper copies start piling up in my office and make me feel guilty about all the things I'm not keeping up with. But, you know, there we are. Anyway, you can find Busted in New York in hardcover right now from FSG. It'll be available in paperback from Picador on November 12th, 2020, for you time travelers out there. And Blackballed is out now from New York Review Books. They're both great reads. They will both take you out of, well, they'll take me out of my experience, and I think they do the same for you, and get you to see the world from another perspective. Anyway, Blackballed, Busted in New York, Darryl Pinckney. Go read. Now, here's Darryl's bio. Darryl Pinckney, a longtime contributor to the New York Review of Books, is the author of the novel High Cotton, winner of a LA Times Book Prize, and the works of nonfiction, Blackballed, The Black Vote and U.S. Democracy, Out There, Mavericks of Black Literature, and Busted in New York and Other Essays. He is a recipient of the Harold D. Vercel Memorial Award for Distinguished Prose from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. He lives in New York. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Darryl Pinckney. With both Blackballed coming out in a new edition and Busted in New York coming out in paperback as a collection of your work over, 3 decades, what was it like revisiting your earlier work for both of these collections? And I think particularly with Blackballed, the political environment in which it was written versus now, as we're a few weeks away from what we hope will be, well, either way is going to be a monumental election.
I was so wounded by the election in 2016 that I was one of those who never got over having been so wrong. In Blackballed, I end not just hopeful, but fairly certain that the coalition that put Obama in office twice would hold and elect Hillary Clinton, though she was not a popular candidate. Everyone said, it's not that I don't like women, I just don't like Hillary Clinton, but they forgot why they disliked Hillary Clinton in the first place. So I think that for a long time, I was so startled by the election of Donald Trump that I didn't trust my feeling about the present. My feeling about history, or the history involved, I had more confidence in because there it is. You can, the Blackballed is built entirely from the testimony of the first person, autobiographies, things like that, participants, to make it sort of clear that this was a human drama with no certain outcome. So I understood the history. I was just shocked by the reaction to it, or whatever you want to call it. And I still am. The idea that this man is viable, gives me or causes me dismay. As for Busted in New York, it represents a kind of the social reporting or engagement with Black culture as a subject. But it doesn't, from the past 25 years, mostly from the New York Review of Books, but it doesn't have, most of the viewing and work I'd done has been in literature or literary history. And so that's not in this. Even so, I hope this doesn't sound really weird to say, but looking back, I'm surprised, or I don't know what to say, touched or something, that so much work went into each thing. When you look back, you're surprised, or ought to be, that you made an effort. Because, of course, then you forget it, the struggle. But, yes.
Was there a degree of, let me put it from my perspective, outside of certain of the pieces being pegged to particular historic events, there were aspects where I simply wasn't sure when, I had to go to the end to see what year they were written in. They seemed, so of our time, of this moment, I guess, instead of realizing that, that was from 1998. That's,
Yes.
I don't know how much of that
Well,
How much of that continuum, you experience as a writer in the process of observing and writing?
well, reading back to some of these events, even to Ferguson, you see yourself in this kind of historical chain, or I don't know the right word. And as we come to this moment, I feel how much older I am now from when I was in the first essay in that book, and I wasn't exactly a young person then either. So the feeling of how long these issues in this form have been occupying us, and a kind of awareness that this subject now belongs to others, because I can't keep up anymore, really.
That's something that really struck me, the generational differences that
Yeah.
weigh upon you throughout for both of those books, but particularly the continuum of Busted in New York.
Yeah.
Was there a moment when that really struck you, that the shift that had occurred, that
Well,
you felt that moment of
I've always felt it,
yeah.
because it was acted out in front of you. My grandfather and my father disagreed over civil rights marches in the early '60s. My sisters and my father disagreed over, Vietnam War politics in the late '60s and the early '70s. My father sort of, went more over to sort of their side of things. But now I feel in just the vocabulary or the way a lot of young people are talking, not part of the discussion that they're having among themselves. You don't always want to be the person in the room who says, yes, but in 19 so and so, blah, blah, blah. You have to let them talk and find their way and redefine and listen more than try to, because everyone should read. They can look up all these things too.
Was there a sense that your background in literary history sort of, I would say, gave you that perspective, helped you see that it doesn't matter how in the moment I feel I'm going to be passé, and this whole moment is going to be something that other people have to just educate themselves about?
No, it's been a surprise in that way. It's been a surprise. I think because our generation, didn't think that we were getting older in that way, that we saw the previous generation. A lot of people thought their children were their friends, and that was a mistake. They're not. They're your judges. So a lot of hashtag Me Too, in addition to wanting justice for women in the workplace and elsewhere, demanded a change in the culture of the workplace. And part of that was pushing out a lot of these guys who thought their acts were ageless. And not to mention the culture of learning and arts institutions changed as well, so that they're not really personality driven.
Yeah.
And that in some cases is a loss. Someone's vision often built these things people are fighting over now. A single vision. But anyway, so that was a surprise in that way, just not paying attention to the curve, really. But I don't know. And I think the same would be true even when sort of writing about literature, since most of it was literature of the past. I was surprised to have joined them.
Do you feel that sense of legacy about your own work?
In mine,
Yeah.
no. I mean, you can't say. Uh, an ideal reader is often in the future, and that's the only thing you can hope for.
This is a question I wanted to get to later, but I might forget it because of the context you just brought up. When you mentioned the changing visions and the way, foundations change as their leaders age or leave, can you talk a bit about your history with the New York Review of Books and how the institution has evolved over the years, especially post Silvers and Epstein?
Um, I
Unless that's
think
going to get
that
you in trouble.
no, I
Okay.
think that the most important thing back then, when I first was realizing what it was how anti-Vietnam War it was, and who were the people writing these essays: Mary McCarthy, I.F. Stone, Paul Goodman. Um, it was a very gripping forum in that respect. When I first read the New York Review of Books or had it in my hands, I didn't know what it was. A high school teacher wanted me to see an open letter to my sister, Miss Angela Davis, by James Baldwin. And both of them happened to be heroes to us in the sense that they made it very okay for Black kids to be bookish or interested in school, particularly Angela Davis. So, there were heroes for lots of reasons. And then there was this. When I was took Elizabeth Harvick's writing class, that's when I really, my introduction to the New York Review of Books began, because she was surprised I hadn't read F.W. Dupuis' essay on James Baldwin that had been in the first issue. And so she sat me down with, she had these bound volumes of back issues, sort of reduced to sort of encyclopedia size. And she just said, well, here. And I had to sort of bring it back eventually. But, I just sat down and started reading it. And I remember Zoe Heller saying that for her, the review had been, an important part of her education. And I think that's true for many people. It certainly was in my case. It really went with everything else that was going on at the time in New York in the 70s, which was, a very, in my memory, a very exciting place because so much was happening on so many different fronts. And the review was certainly a part of it for me. Even if it wasn't youth culture. This was in those years, New Wave really took hold in the East Village and in the scene down there, and that was also a youth culture. But the review was slightly something else. It was, an intellectual culture still, and I never thought one excluded the other. But you did have to take a subway between them.
True. Yeah, how well has that sense of community, intellectual community, held up for you?
That's difficult to say because I left New York in the 80s, and I was gone for over 20 years. And then, now being back, um, 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 it's a different place.
Sure.
I listen to the news, or I read things, and I don't know all the names anymore of the politicians, writers, actors, singers, you name it. And there is really an astonishing amount going on, or seeming to. So You know, that is hard to say. But I think just to judge from the limited online life and reading life I have, I would say that it's very much there, just in kind of uh, um,
Sort of virtual community in that way.
well, it's always been a world of sort of overlapping circles, really.
Sure.
And then one place felt like the center, or um, the metropolis. Used to be you could start a national magazine in the United States by just saying what was going on in New York. Um, I don't know if that's true anymore, or if people think there is a mainstream anymore. There is a kind of uh, that division between commercial or non-commercial and high and low. These they don't have so much meaning at the moment.
Yeah, and that's sort of what I'm wondering about, how much the ramifications of that and what it means for that sense of community and communal conversation.
I think it's much harder for people to feel they're speaking with any effect or being heard at all through print. Um, 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 because so there's so much competitive type uh, in the world as well. Um, I read an interview recently with a former classmate and a writer I have the deepest respect for, Luc Sant, who surprised me when he said that he was on Instagram. He loved Instagram. Most everyone he knew was on Instagram, and I still haven't written him and said, I'm not on Instagram. And I don't really. It doesn't. I find even email something of a strain, and it's just become a sort of business tool because it's not the nicest way to stay in touch with people. So I don't know. I guess someone's collected emails will be published someday, but I don't see them. Maybe some people practice them like letters.
There are a few,
not for me.
Yeah, there are a few writers from whom I receive emails that are clearly things that would have been, handwritten or typed once upon a time and mailed. But yeah, in fact, that's a question. Where did it's a chicken and egg question, I guess. Your lack of engagement with communication technology, with social networking and all that. I'll put it bluntly, technological incompetence or choice on your part that led to atrophying of any technological interest? Did you just stay away from it for your own sake, basically?
No, I think that people whose kids were growing up with all of this were in a much better position to sort of learn it. I don't like being sort of teased over techno incompetence as an old person.
Okay.
No, because there it is. I don't like it because it's true. And I can't say. I think it's sort of not having anyone around who's in the forefront of any of this. But it's also, even when people's kids have set things for us and left instructions, etc., they don't sort of really penetrate.
Sure. I used to do IT support for Samuel Delaney, the writer.
Oh, wow, yes.
We were pals. And so, Chip, don't worry. Let me set up a computer for you. I'll do this and this and this. And then realize what a bottomless pit that was going to be pretty quick. It's all 20 years ago, but I rapidly realized exactly what you're talking about.
Is he in Philadelphia now?
Yeah, he's down in Philly. This is back in the Upper West Side, in the old day. I published a couple of his books. I published his collection of letters, 1984, and then I reissued The Madman. But yeah, I
think The Motion of Light and Water is really beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh God, it's
No, I think he's wonderful, and I wish I could be in touch with him. Anyway, Yes, no. So it's a problem because, you know, you don't know what the rest of the world is, not the rest of the world. You don't know what other people are looking at, what their sources of information are. I don't like suspicion against social media here because in other places, especially someplace like Turkey at the moment, you know, the official media, uh, social media, and these this is the last independent places or where you can find out what's really going on in Turkey. You
Yeah.
just can't quote it, and you can get in trouble for it. I was reading something from Penn about that. So, you know, it all depends on who's using what, not the thing itself.
Sure.
But you know, I don't really know what QAnon is. As often as
Even
I
I've
read
stayed
something
away
about it,
from
you know,
from looking at it too deeply.
I don't, you know,
Yeah.
yeah,
I'm
it's a kind
just
of pornography, and not
yeah.
the kind I'm interested in.
Sure. Yeah.
But I think the biggest problem is we have really a lot of books, a number of which most of which I've not read.
Yeah.
And now that I'm aware that not only am I not going to take certain trips, but you know, time is running out, I'm sort of more enchanted by the book as an object than ever. And I don't really mean fancy editions or things like that. It's just the companionship of a book at a time like this
Yeah.
is means a lot to me.
Yeah. I hear you. If I could, well, I will send you a picture after this of what my home office / library looks like, because it's, if anything has helped me survive the last 7 or so months, yeah, it's been luckily I'm surrounded by over 2,000 books, you know, in my immediate environment, plus all the
Yeah,
ones that I've stored away,
yeah.
most of which, like yourself, you know, I haven't gotten around to reading. Now, do you remember that moment of, I'm never going to get around to all of these? And have you done book culls in the past with, you know, these are the books I will either never reread or never get to, or do you sort of hold on to them figuring there's going to be a chance sometime?
You know, they book calls have come for different reasons. Early on, it would have been for you know,
Moving and yeah.
moving. We'll say moving and not say urgent kid decisions. But it would have been sort of moving. And then there's always this reading for a particular reason. And then once the project or whatever it was is finished, you sort of know you're not going back to those books, but you know they sort of stay around. And then there are those things I've not gotten to and probably never will. I don't get sort of books from various places anymore. I used to just get sent a lot, and then had a lot of that. But I don't. And then also, browsing in bookstores became less and less a part of my city experience, and that's my fault because that was something that was, you know, always a big part of New York. Um, and you know, bookstores mean something to you. You can make yourself go to them. Um, you know, if it means enough to you, you can find them.
Yeah.
But you know, I stopped going as often as I used to. So, you know, in a bookstore, you would sort of see something you didn't know you wanted until you saw it. But
Right.
online, you don't really have that. Uh, so, you know, my intake of books is very uh, particular and nothing like what it used to
Gotcha.
be. So, yeah, but I need to kind of start. And it's
Well,
also who takes them now, you know?
yeah, that's part of, I have a enormous stack of to be sold
Yeah.
out by the laundry room, but I know they'll
Yeah.
never be sold. So
I mean,
presumably
does the
they'll,
Strand still do it?
you know, with that sort of volume of stuff, you have to imagine driving in, carrying boxes in, and all. I'm in northern New Jersey, but
Oh, I see.
you know, if you're showing up with a single box of books because you're a New York resident, you know, chances are you're going to get about $5 a credit. So,
They used to come for them if you had a
oh, did
lot.
they?
Yeah.
Well, in fact,
Yeah.
for Busted in New York, I actually went to a bookstore for the first time since February. On Friday, I drove down to the Watchung booksellers because they had it in
Wow.
stock.
Wow.
They had a curbside pickup, but I picked it up there. But I thought, I should go inside. I haven't been inside a bookstore since February. Let me at least just look at books and
Yeah.
do exactly what you were talking about. And I ended up coming across something that I didn't know was out yet, and was happy
Yeah.
to pick that up too. But yeah, it's a
It is
different culture.
yes, it's a way to make solitude something more than that.
Mm-hmm. Now, I do want to make sure we talk blackballed because elections coming up in several weeks, and I'm interested in that question of coalition voting as you address in a couple of the pieces, and whether there's a black vote or whether there are voters who are black, what it means in America, and maybe in that sense what the last several elections have taught you. Which is a whole bunch of questions piled into one.
Yes, well, I mean, the most urgent thing, of course, is that we can't debate anymore over the efficacy of the vote, or is the vote enough, or will the vote solve our problems? It's clear that the only way to even begin to think about how to address our problems and the future this time around can only be solved by voting. It's almost the last chance this election. So the vote has to be rethought in our American hearts as a radical act, because so many people don't want you to vote, and will go to extraordinary lengths to keep you from voting. So I think that we have to, in some ways, you know, think about the vote as being really at the center of American culture and American purpose, that cuts across these lines of identity that people have drawn so vividly. And we need to, I think, I don't like the construction we need to, I'm sorry. I wish we could
Mm-hmm.
have a more ferocious coming together. It's always an unfair battle. It's like talking to someone who is so primitive, you can't sort of go down to that level to argue with the person. Or it's always been that black people had to behave better than the white person because more understanding is on the black person's side. It would be like the grown up talking to the less grown up person or something.
Mm-hmm.
But there are these things we have in common that aren't matters of advantage or disadvantage when everybody's threatened with the loss of them. So I think that common cause really should make us sort of rise up and fend off a dictatorship. I mean, there's no bottom to how far the Republican Party has shown itself willing to go in order to stay in power. It's very shocking.
It's been very educational, and not just this administration, but the last few years of the previous one.
Yeah, just how it can all slip away. I mean, we thought Weimar was such a glamorous time when I was young. We went on and on about Weimar and decadence, and I remember Jane Kramer had a very chilling line in an article about Berlin in the New Yorker. It said that Berlin may have been Christopher Isherwood's town, but it was Hitler's town too. Not quite true, since Berlin never liked Hitler, but
in spirit,
while everyone was sort of having this crisis, other people were concentrating on exploiting and ruining the liberal state. And the same thing is going on. It's just that liberalism, by definition, can't gang up on anybody. So it seems like the world is watching Fox, but that's because whoever's watching not Fox, they don't mass in the same way as the right does and has always done. The
Do you think the protests this year, the BLM protests?
Yes, very
you
much.
Form a counter to that?
Yes. I think it showed America that what it looked like, and jumped even over the news in that way. Yeah. That because people saw themselves.
What surprised you most about the protests and how they proliferated this year?
The persistence, the high number of white kids, and that the police killings went on. And also that I felt differently. I felt somehow not quite the same myself about the looting.
How'd that change?
I wasn't. I remember reading something early on about the riot in Minneapolis, and that it was in a part of town that had a lot of black businesses, and so they were the ones that suffered. And so that was why I was always not for this kind of indiscriminate street vandalism, because a lot of black businesses were often the targets. But in New York, they left the Strand alone and sort of hit Gucci's and things like that.
Chris Rock had a whole routine about that back in the 90s. But
yes. So,
I can't repeat it, but you could. So go.
Well, that's not my word, Yeah. But I don't want to call it sophistication, but there was some kind of, this is what the consumer culture deserves. People aren't going to, they were in front of Nike shops and Gucci and things like that. They went for the labels.
Yeah.
And maybe that, I don't know. I didn't I wasn't so schoolmarmish about them that I would have been in the past.
Yeah. And seeing those sorts of protests proliferate outside the U.S. as other particular European countries started to deal with their colonial history.
If they are.
Yeah.
A friend in Berlin, Christoph Ernst, pointed out that all of those young people demonstrating about Black Lives Matter in America probably didn't have very much sense of the German colonial massacres in Southwest Africa. So, yes, if they have, but, and sort of taking the knee in Oxford, yeah, okay. But I don't know. The past is so case by case. There is no one rule of confronting it, because there's no end to what you can find out. Mary Tudor burned Protestants, but she forbade English participant in the slave trade. So, some statue is always going to offend somebody.
Had this when Yugoslavia disintegrated and everybody was against the Serbs, except Israelis and other very observant Jews like my family who said, but during the war, they were on our side while the Bosnians were out to kill us. So, it's
very, well,
there's no justification for history.
No, that's when you throw in the Croatians, to sort of make sure that, the really bad people postpone the questions.
Right.
And all this stuff is still there. I sort of will never feel the same about Peter Handke.
Yeah.
Ever. I can't. Even though his stand goes back into these very things you're talking about.
Yeah.
But not for me.
Mm-hmm.
So it's difficult, I think. And the past is not, the past is, you were there, but, the here is what's going on now. And if you want to address these kind of questions as being systemic, I think that's that's a much more complicated question.
Mm-hmm.
And people are trying, but some roads are not the right ones, I think.
Understood. The other image from Blackballed that I wanted to bring up, it's one that I remember asking a Black scholar friend of mine in the immediate aftermath of it. The night of Obama's election in 2008 and the image of Jesse Jackson crying, I wondered what it, how we're meant to read it, I suppose. What prompted the tears, the joy, the could have been me, the maybe that sense of, as you said, the continuum or the links in history where.
How could it not be all of those things?
Yeah. What did you make?
We're not in his head, but I would say this is very much a kind of, this was a man who his influence within the Democratic Party in many ways made Obama's nomination possible. The change in delegate selections and representations for minorities after his two campaigns. So he did sort of, his way paved the way. It's just that we've come to this very strange moment where, where someone with a civil rights background like Jesse Jackson, we always said wouldn't convince the whole country that he was representing them. And I thought that was wrong because, as we now see, civil rights is not all races and classes can lose their civil rights if crazy people are in power or something like that. And yet Obama was this guy who didn't come from civil rights any more than Kamala Harris has. So I think, yes, a moment was certainly ending, and that you could sort of, it was very clear that one thing was ending and another beginning. And for a long time, civil rights leadership was almost like an occupation open to very intelligent people who couldn't get work in a more, in different sorts of places. And Jesse Jackson is almost, he came up from sort of the grassroots as not quite, but, from King's organization, or that sort of alliance. And I think these organizations in the 60s and early 70s were sort of the last expressions of that sort of thing. Now it's even more striking if someone from a particular background elects to be or accepts to be head of one of these historic Black organizations.
It seems that the strength...
Does any of that make any sense?
Oh, yeah. It's that huge conflict I felt, again, as an outsider, looking at that man crying in 2008, thinking it's probably celebratory, but there's probably a lot more history and mixed...
Oh, how could there not be?
Yeah.
How could I not be? Again, it's important to remember none of this was ever certain.
Yeah.
So that things worked out often the way they did is the surprise, not that, white supremacy and the right wing don't like it. That shouldn't be the surprise. And they've never stopped fighting it. That shouldn't be the surprise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, has that been I'd say, the biggest disappointment to you, or I don't even know how to phrase it, of the last 3 years or so?
Yes.
The virulence of it?
Yes, absolutely. These last few years have been very ugly. One outrage after another. We even forget them. There's been so many. And this is not the new normal. It's not normal. It's a society being deliberately convulsed by people who uh, exploit the I don't know atmosphere for the old story, money and power. So things that used to be kind of fringe feelings, I think, have moved into the center of society. So here we are.
Have you gotten to travel much? Not obviously nowadays, but during the administration, have you gotten either around the U.S., abroad, etc.? Or
Well,
have you been
before the virus,
the before time, as we call it?
Yes, yes, but this was also the time of Brexit was unfolding, has been unfolding for a long time. So, you know, um, um, I don't know why hemming and hawing. Yes, some, usually for work, and often having to do with the work with being working in the theater with Robert Wilson, who I've done a lot of work for over the years. This amazing American director who does very avant-garde theater.
Sure.
I remember being in Paris, I guess a year ago, when the Yellow Vests were demonstrating. And the theater was very near the Place de la Concorde, so I had a pass to go through what the police had shut down against these threatened demonstrations. And I'd never seen the Place de la Concorde empty before. It was like sort of a film from the 50s, sort of no traffic in the morning in Paris or something like that. It was astonishing.
It's funny, the absence of people and of motion seems to be the most striking or disconcerting aspect of our world. My wife's people are from Louisiana, about 40 minutes from New Orleans. And we got engaged right before Katrina. We're going to get married down there. We about 6 months after the storm. And we went down to New Orleans 6 weeks after the storm hit, went out to visit her family, but then went into the city. And it was the same thing, seeing a city, looking at Bourbon Street and seeing maybe 3 human beings the entire length of it. It just, when you remove us from the equation, things get really strange, I guess.
Well, they're prettier.
Yeah, certainly.
Because that's no cars.
Yeah.
A street with no cars parked on it is wonderful to look at. But I remember going to, and this was now, say, 2 years after Katrina, going to the Ninth Ward, and the first thing he thought of was that place where the Warsaw Ghetto used to be. It's just this blank ground. And the Ninth Ward looked like that, like it had been deserted for 50 years or something, Yeah. It was really, really eerie. I didn't go to see Midtown or any places like that in the past 6 months. But yes, the great kind of thrill of New York used to be the strangers, watching people.
Yeah.
And so the empty streets are always just, in New York just sort of are saying something bad is going on. The empty streets during the day.
Yeah. I should ask about your approach to the pandemic. Would you eat inside a restaurant?
Now?
No. Yeah.
So, not yet.
Okay.
While we could still stand and sit outside, we sit outside.
Yeah.
And then there was an article in the paper yesterday about, cases rising again in certain neighborhoods and things like that. And, in Rhode Island. And so that Amtrak corridor gives me pause again. So.
Yeah. Oh, my day job, I'm a lobbyist for a weird part of the pharmaceutical industry, not the bad guys. And I've got lobbyists down in D.C., but I'm just in what would it take for me to sit on a train from Newark to Union Station? I'm like, I can't come up with anything that would be so important that I would do that versus getting in the car, driving and all. But
my suffering aunt has a doctor's appointment in a week in Boston. And I would like to be there because she's got confusion of mind. So, I can't. And then I have to go to these are things not for broadcast.
Okay. I'll cut this part down.
Yes. We haven't traveled. I haven't traveled, but it's now becoming unavoidable. To keep my UK visa, I've got to go back at some point this year. And I used to just as a matter of course. Yeah. But now, I'm really don't quite know how to arrange it, or is there the air bridge yet? And
there's a piece just yesterday in the Wall Street Journal that they are starting US UK. I'll send you a PDF after this. But they're trying to figure out what the requirements would be.
Brexit desperately needs it,
Yeah.
It's the quarantine on either end, you see.
Yeah.
And so if you don't still have a place in London, it's
again, couldn't imagine.
I know.
Well, none of us could.
I think it's the unendingness of it that gets to people and worries me about the vote because, for some people just want to pull the plug one way or the other. And so, turnout is very important. And I think another thing that heartened me looking at the demonstrations and hearing from people who went to them were the reports of the number of young people that were registering to vote. Yeah. Because, at the moment, we don't have the courts. We don't have anything except, this electoral process for the moment. And other things I don't want to contemplate. I don't think the military is on Trump's side. I don't like those words.
That's not the vibe I get either. But.
No, it's the internal vibe I'm more worried about. I remember I.F. Stone once said that he, as a liberal, he was so used to losing, that it was a kind of mental condition. And so we have this kind of, that bullies are supposed to win or do win. I don't know how to phrase it, but well, that's
self-defeating attitude. As a neurotic Jew from the Northeast, I know exactly where he's coming from. So
yes, worry. Exactly. As a neurotic Black from the Midwest, I know exactly where he's coming from. But, where do you find the militancy to defend a chilled out way of life? Do you see what I mean? When you're standing up for freedom, you're standing up for this life of choices that you make as an individual with the support of the state. Mm-hmm. So, you're not in a position of zealotry. Yeah. But freedom is not, I guess you can be a zealot about it. You have to be.
I'll tell you,
I guess that's what's happening.
Well, I say right after the inauguration in 2017, I was recording a podcast down in Swarthmore because in the before time, I used to actually drive to every guest's place to record. And down in Pennsylvania, I was driving back. Oh God, tell your partner.
Where's the farthest you've gone?
I flew in 2015. I spent 48 hours in the UK to go to Cambridge and sit down with Clive James.
Oh my gosh.
That was,
wow.
Again, you know exactly why I couldn't just say, we'll do it some other time, you know.
Yes, you have to send that to James. My God.
Yeah, I pitched him and he's like, yeah, sure, you'll have to come out here in February. I'm like, oh my God, yeah, I will come out there and we'll sit down. I recorded with him and then his wife and then Anthea Bell, the great translator.
Yeah.
But literally landed Saturday morning, flew home Monday morning, because when was I going to get that chance again?
Yeah.
So, but the Philly one, I was driving back week after the inauguration and travel ban, the protests at the Philly International Airport. I was driving on 95 and I saw the protests and I thought, my mother, with whom I went down to Washington to protest for Soviet Jews back in the 80s, would not forgive me if I did not just pull over and join the protests at the airport. And that's, you know, and reading about your parents and their activism and all that, I thought, you know, again, we're different white Jews. I'm first generation American, so very different, you know, upbringings.
Russian.
But that, mom's side was Ukrainian and Polish. Dad's side was Romanian and kind of, well, Black Forest German. They met in Israel. Her family got to England.
Roth, right?
Roth. Roth. German Roth. for red. But
no,
yeah,
I was thinking like Joseph Roth, you know.
Oh yeah, if you want to pronounce it correctly. But I've been using the, you know, Americanized one.
Roth is a lot easier if you ask me.
But, you know, but that was, you know, it just, that example she set over the years. I thought I have to, I have to stop and I've got to join these guys. And, you know,
but you see, this is part of this idea of liberalism in America that I have, because I can remember in the mid 60s, people were terribly nice to one, you know, because it was just that kind of place. And anyone who wasn't nice to you, you never encountered, you didn't speak to them, because the schools, you know, were large. This was the new frontier. But the Jewish kids were the ones who asked you home, either because they didn't know any better or because they really couldn't wait to have a black friend. And there you were. And you know, I lived in a place where there were, you know, country clubs Jews could not join.
Right.
And the only place we could swim was the Jewish Community Center. I was a member of the Israeli folk dancing club. And all these friends from junior high school, I still am friends with, you know, and they're grandparents now and this and that. And the pandemic has put us all much more in touch with each other than usual, you know. Sure. But I can remember, you know, the 67 war and the idea that Israel was the liberal state. Can you believe it? And, you know, the Arab societies were authoritarian and, you know, women weren't free. I think all that changed in 73. With the sort of Palestinian question really started to, in spite of the way it was brought up, right, and kind of didn't go away. And then I can remember in 76 how, you know, next girlfriend came over absolutely in tears that at last peace between, you know, Israel and Egypt and this kind of thing. And, you know, nothing held and it just got sort of worse. But that's another thing that I've seen.
Well, I will say that one of the things that resonates in your work that I think it came up in relation to your travels in Europe and, you know, literary writers who had traveled like Wright and Baldwin, that sense that, you know, you think you fit in and you think you're accepted, but, you know, you're still the other in some way or another. Trust me, as a Jew in America, at least as a Jew who's first generation, who has family who went through the Holocaust, I know my skin coloration I can pass, but there's also that degree of push comes to shove. I'm still the Jew here, not. So,
I mean, I was going to say it's because of Israel that this Black Jewish coalition fell apart. Not just domestic policy or sort of neoconservative reaction to social engineering. I think that was sort of a big part of it. And I always thought the Christian right had this very cynical attitude that Christ cannot come again unless they or their proxies are in control of the Holy Land.
Right.
And so, I didn't think that was such an advance for Trump to give.
And that was part of the Bush era also.
Jerusalem. I mean, what guy could be less deserving?
Yeah.
So anyway, yes, I know what you mean, but I can't separate. I am trying to fight off nostalgia that makes me think things were better than back then. That's not what I'm saying at all.
Sure.
I'm sort of saying the way to keep things moving is to remember that this is a human drama and we are all the actors in it and have agency.
Right.
We're not forces, we're people. In this case, we're voters, and then after that, we'll see what we have to be. But I do regret the cultural life of the past, which I think was a golden age. So it makes some of the cultural politics since then harder for me to endorse.
How do you mean?
Well, as it goes back to what I was saying earlier about how a particular vision of someone, sort of founded something or drove something or inspired something, whether it be a company, a theater, or an institution, or even sometimes an aesthetic, the whole thing. I'm not sure this works by committee, which we have very much at the moment in all things.
Or algorithm.
Yes, we want to say that everything is the same or nothing has more value than anything else, but it turns out not to be true. And so I slightly mind my sense of the professionalization of the arts is that I'm not sure everyone should have access to education and the ability or the means to encourage their abilities and talents, but there is also such a thing as the mystery of talent, and talent is not democratic in its appearance. It's more like strikes by sainthood, not by apostolic succession or something.
I always come off as an arch conservative when I talk about greatness and genius in literature. Yes. I come off like Harold Bloom, who I admit,
yes, one does. And I'm thinking, thoughts. But look who you're talking to. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I feel very much at odds with, people who mind this kind of vocabulary about literature and the arts. But I do feel, that it's a sort of priesthood. And that's the wrong word because, well, look what the priesthood got up to. But, I sort of feel it is an elect. It's not a profession. Not everyone can do it. It is true that a bad artist suffers as much as a good one. But that doesn't change anything after that. So I sort of feel out of sync with the times when it comes to the things I most care about. I grew up someone sort of reading literature and it's not that you passed over the racist bits or anything like that. You just kind of knew where you were. I mean, everyone was sort of, you were taught that The Great Gatsby is the perfect uh, uh, American novel,
Sure.
and that, there's not a bad line in it. However, I do remember the yellow Cadillac of eye-rolling Chris Rockwood people uh, um, that pull up to Gatsby on the highway. Now, Elizabeth Harburg taught us that Gatsby's secret was that he was Jewish. Yeah. But an old friend, Celia McGee, said that the thing going around now is that Gatsby is, black or has black blood or something. And that's why there are these kind of seemingly gratuitous appearances of eye-rolling black people in yellow Cadillacs on the highway next to Gatsby or something like that. So I'm not sure. But, you read it and you know what people are saying about it. And so a bit of you says, no, I don't think it's so perfect because this is in here. You can accept it as the historical moment, and in fact, you have to. But I don't know how I feel about it aesthetically. How it sort of fits in. So I don't know if that's a good example, if I made myself clear.
Well, it puts me in mind, last week's guest was John Keene, writer and professor at Rutgers Newark. His last collection, Counter Narratives, had a creative revision of Huck Finn with Jim's story after, and where Huck and Tom end up in the Civil War. And I thought, as a white guy, I never would have come up with this in a million years, but oh my God, this is an incredible, incredible take of the story after the story.
I was sort of from the Leslie Fiedler school. I'll never get over
that. Now, one thing you mentioned Elizabeth Hardwick before and just now, you wrote once that she liked to say there were only two reasons to write: desperation or revenge. Do you hold to that? And if so, which of those really drives you in your writing?
I would say it's the desperation, but she meant desperation about many things. One, to write; two, to exist; three, to pay for something; four, because you said you would do it, and so that it's your life, your identity, and revenge on anyone who wanted you to fail or who you may be sort of jealous of.
Sure. And that comes up in Orwell's Why I Write also as one of his, admittedly, he had to put that in as a motivation among the others, like changing the world and using language in a unique way, but also to get your own back on others, I think is how he put it.
Yes. Well, he was always weird, apparently, as little Eric Blair at Eton. So. Yeah.
The grudges sustained him.
From that world of but people didn't pick on him. He was so resolutely. Someone who was at school with him told me that he was so much himself. People didn't bother him. You couldn't pick on Blair.
Yeah. But again, I'm sure he perceived it as such, even if nobody else on the outside did. But
well, the other thing, alone, you do,
yeah. You just create, as I can attest, you start creating grudges and problems that other people on the outside are like, Gil, we didn't really think that about you at all, and then you realize, hey, you wasted your life filled with fury and rage. But anyway, that's neither here nor there.
You left out shame.
Oh my God, how could I? I'm a Jew. I of course carry shame every moment.
Sometimes I'll think of something I did a month ago, 10 years ago, and I'll just make noises in the street to try to drive it away, like blah blah. And
I'll physically
crazy people on the streets of New York.
Yeah, no, I'll physically contort for something I did 40 years ago. Will still strike me as oh God, I wish exactly. I can't believe I said that. Yeah.
How do I return this stolen object?
And that, I believe, is what gets back to the political thing. We didn't exactly get to how they can do this is the lack of shame.
Oh,
That's it. My biggest realization was, my God, if you have no shame, you don't experience what you and I just talked about. You can do anything.
well, it's
You
no
can just,
conscience. It's no conscience.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
no
it's no
thought
conscience.
whatsoever about,
No respect,
contradicting.
no
Yeah,
conscience. A sort of narcissism that gives narcissism a bad name.
right.
Um, just on and on. But they disregard for law, precedent, um, statesmanship, anything you can think of is total, and that so many people are willing to go along with it
Yeah.
is very shocking. That there's nobody telling him, you can't behave like this, or you can't do this to American institutions. There's
Yeah.
just
And that's
nobody.
what I mean about
Nobody.
everyone else. It's a lack of shame
Yeah,
in all
yeah,
the other associated parties.
yeah.
But
It's just money, I think. There's a kind
proximity
of
to power.
looting,
Yeah.
and power.
Well, as Bob
And
Dylan said,
and
steal a little and they throw you in jail, steal a lot and they make you king. That's,
well, it's also an expression that maybe they feel it's already lost,
yeah,
and so they'll just loot the store before the new owners come.
right. Now, do you prefer writing political versus literary pieces, or do you see them all as as of a piece?
Politics is harder because I it's more sort of sign reading, and that's very hard.
Mm-hmm.
When you're writing about a book, you can sort of look at it several times and get a much clearer sense of how you feel than sort of immediate events. I was always a very poor student, so anything that's sort of homework and research is difficult for me.
Yeah.
Because I just have no discipline about anything except beating myself up. So I find it all very hard. All writing, I find hard. Nothing is casual. But I find starting harder than being in it.
Yeah.
And once I'm in it, then you can sort of surrender to what you're doing. And I like best that feeling of looking forward to working on something, not, oh God, I have to do this, but
Yeah.
curious to see what the next thing could be. So, excuse me. Yeah.
I'd say that brings me to the most uncomfortable question I can ask, even worse than Palestinian relations, Black identity, etc. Tell me about what you're working on next.
I'm working on now a memoir called Come Back in September, A Literary Education on West 67th Street. I don't know about the title, but Come Back in September. And it's about entering Elizabeth Harper's class at Barnard, going across the street to be in her class, and how I sort of came to know her and listen to her for a number of years, and the part the New York Review of Books played in my life when I was young, and also about some of my peers at the time, like Luc Sant, whom I mentioned before. It's very irritating, his genius. It's really irritating.
I've got a friend who's good friends with him and says the same thing.
It's really irritating. And he's such a nice guy that you can't kind of mind it. And then there was a guy, a young filmmaker named Howard Brookner, made a documentary about William Burroughs and then one about Robert Wilson. But guy got sick in the middle of his first big feature
He
film.
was Brad Gooch's partner, right?
That's right, yes.
Yeah, Brad and I recorded around his book about Howard's decline.
Smash cut, yeah. Well, before Brad, Howard and I knew each other at Columbia, and then he met Brad. So it's about that in a way. And he was a very dear friend. And so, AIDS kind of ended everything. So it's about sort of things like that. But it's mostly about Lizzie and Barbara and Susan Sontag. And, I don't like these things that, I don't know. I can remember one night listening to these women talk, and there were no men around, meaning the men in their lives, like editors, husbands, or anyone like that they had to defer to or reassure. They were just talking as themselves. And, first thing that you think is how smart they were. They really were. And Lizzie read all the time, and made me sort of more of a reader than this was the excitement of college, was everything you could find out from one day to the next.
Yeah.
And she had that and fed that. So if it's anything, it's sort of like remembering her views on things, and trying to remember these women for what they contributed to the culture, and to find their personality in the way they talked and what they were writing. And I'm not so interested in the gossip and things like that. Although when I met her, The Dolphin had just been published, and a kind of faux pas on my part made us cross a student-teacher line rather quickly. I referred to one of the poems without considering how these poems may have upset her.
Yeah.
And that really did upset her. But she knew I didn't mean it, or didn't know what I'd done, and forgave me. But, it made me kind of pay attention to everything she said in a very different way. And, it wasn't just me who admired her and had the benefit of her patience with young writers, but she met Luke, and Sigrid Nunes had been her student, and Nancy Lehman, and at one time Mary Gordon, I made the mistake of referring to her once as the Nadia Boulanger of literature, and she was furious and really hurt, because she said, "I'm not a teacher, I'm a writer." But she had an enormous influence on anyone who came in her. Yeah, so it's about that, and Lowell and her relations with him, and his death, and all these things. Maybe it's about too many things at the moment.
Well,
but it's from 1973 to 1989, when Mary McCarthy and Howard Brookner died.
Yeah. If we're able to meet in person by the time it comes out, which I pray to God we're past what we're...
Can we be going on like this for how long? I mean...
I will come out to 133rd, 123rd. I forget. Yeah. I if you'll have me, I will come out there. We will sit down and have another conversation about the memoir, I hope.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you very much for this. I'm very pleased to talk to you, and I'm sorry if I rambled on a great deal, but I had a good time doing it, and I don't always. So that's you. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And that was Darryl Pinckney. He does not have a website. He is not on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook, so don't look for him there. But you can find lots of his columns and reviews at the New York Review of Books, and I'll put a link to the contributor page for that in the show and episode notes for this one. You can also find pieces he's written elsewhere by searching online for Darryl Pinckney, which is DarrylPinkney. Like I said, I really enjoyed and learned a lot from Blackballed and Busted in New York, so you should seek those books out, especially with the election coming up in a few weeks. There's a lot to learn, a lot to think about. I have not read Darryl's novels yet, but it's entirely possible I will go back and check those out too when I have time. And he did mention that memoir, and I am hoping we can get together in person to record a show when that one comes out. Now, in the before time, this is when I would mention my Patreon and PayPal and ask for your support. I don't want your support. Well, I don't want your financial support. Your emotional and critical support I would appreciate through letters, emails, and postcards. But financially, I would much rather you contributed to artists, writers, and other people in need, whether it's through their Patreons, Kickstarters, GoFundMes, Indiegogos, whatever. If you're not comfortable giving to individuals, there are plenty of institutions out there that could use your help now, like local food banks, freedom funds, voter registration groups, and the like, as well as political campaigns. All I'm going to say is there's a lot of work to be done. So if you can help make the world better and you can afford to donate a little, then please lend a hand. Also, I still have some copies left of the first issue of my very first zine, Haiku for Business Travelers, one copy of which is currently winging its way to Darryl's home. If you want one, it's free. Just drop me a line at, at my email, groth18@gmail.com, or visit haikuforbusinesstravelers.com and hit me up that way. Like I say, it's free. You can kick in a few bucks for postage and production if you want, but you're not obliged. This is not about making money. It's just about me sharing my art, such as it is. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.